streaming class. If this is your first time to join a class, let me explain how it works. Today our topic is the conditionals. If you have a question during the class, write your question in the comment section and I'll answer it at the end of the class. I also have some questions for you to practice what we've learned today, and you can write your answers in the comment section as well, and we'll go over them at the end of the class. Okay, so first let's talk a little bit about what are conditionals and when do we use them. Okay, conditionals we use to talk about probable, imaginary, or impossible results. Okay, they are also called if clauses because you have the first part of the sentence with if and the second part then, so a cause and a result. There are four kinds of conditionals. We have 0, first, second, and third. We're going to talk about all of them today. And in negative sentences, if can be replaced with unless. We'll get an example in a minute. Okay, so let's start with the most basic conditional, the 0 conditional. Okay. When do we use the 0 conditional? To talk about scientific facts and habits, as well as to give instructions. So we form the 0 conditional with if plus present simple on one side of the sentence, then plus present simple on the other side. So both verbs are in present simple in the 0 conditional. We can replace the word if in 0 with when or whenever. Okay, let's look at some examples of the 0 conditional. Okay, the first one is a scientific fact. If you heat ice, it melts. This is always true, so we use the 0 conditional. Okay, the second one is talking about habits. When it rains, I stay inside. This is something general about you. Okay, and the third one is giving instructions. If my mother calls, tell her I'll be home at 3 o'clock. Okay, so all of the verbs are in the present simple. Now let's move on to the first conditional. We use the first conditional to talk about possibility in the future, something that might happen, but we are not 100% sure. We form the first conditional with if plus present simple again. The second part is different than will because it's future plus the infinitive. So since we're talking about the future, we use will plus infinitive. Okay, let's look at some examples. If I get a raise, I'll buy a new car, or I will buy a new car. You can use the contraction form of will. Okay, so you don't know for sure if you'll get a raise, but if you do, you'll buy a new car. Okay, if she doesn't leave soon, she'll miss her train. So we can also use this in the negative. If she doesn't leave soon, she will miss her train. Okay, and last example, if the weather is nice tomorrow, we'll go to the beach. So when you talk about weather, it's always unsure, so we use the first conditional. Okay, now let's look at the second conditional. These get a little bit more complicated as we go. Don't worry if you don't understand everything. Just listen, take notes if you want, and remember that the video you can watch again when we're finished with the live streaming. Okay, so the second conditional we use to talk about impossibility in the future. Something that cannot happen in the future. So we form this with if plus past simple, then would plus infinitive. We use would instead of will because it is impossible, okay? And always, if we're using the verb to be, in the second conditional, were replaces was, no matter the subject, okay? We'll see an example of this now. So, if I had her number, I would call her. but the truth is that you don't, so you can't, okay? This is why we use the second conditional. So the verb to have is in the past simple, had, and then would plus the infinitive. If I had her number, I would call her, okay? If I were you, I wouldn't quit my job. So here we use were instead of was for the subject I, because this is the conditional. It's an unreal situation because you cannot be another person. So it's a hypothetical situation. If I were you, I wouldn't quit my job. And finally, if I could live anywhere in the world, I would live in Bora Bora. But most likely you can't live anywhere in the world because of circumstances, so it's an unreal situation. But if you could, you would live in Bora Bora. Okay, now let's look at the last conditional, the third conditional. This is the most complicated, but we use this to talk about impossibility in the past. Things that normally we use this to express regrets, things that we wish we had done differently in the past, but because we cannot change the past, we use the third conditional. So we form the third conditional with if plus past perfect, so had plus the participle, okay? Then would have plus the participle again, okay? Let's look at some examples so it's a bit more clear, okay? First, if I had known it was going to rain, I would have brought an umbrella, okay? So the past perfect of know, to know, is had known, okay, and I would have brought, the participle of to bring is brought. If I had known it was going to rain, I would have brought an umbrella. But in the past, you didn't know, and so you didn't bring the umbrella. So this is like a regret, something you wish you had done differently in the past. Okay, let's look at the second example. If I had studied more, I would have passed the exam. But you didn't, so it's a regret. If I had studied more, I would have passed the exam. And finally, if I hadn't, so we can also use the negative, if I had section. Okay, question number 1. Write a sentence in the first conditional. How do we form the first conditional? When do we use it? Do you remember? If so, try to think of an example. Write a sentence in the first conditional. Number 2, write a sentence in the second conditional, okay? So same thing. And number 3, write a sentence in the third conditional. Now,